hosting a panel with some smart gentlemen tonight, raising some money for ALS. And for those that are watching, again, if you would like to donate, you can head over to pitcherlist.com/pitchcon/2025. All 100% of the proceeds will go to ALS1 to fight ALS research. So please make sure you guys can donate. And I think there's even a QR code on the screen, which is pretty cool. Scan that and can donate that way as well. But as you guys can see, again, two very smart gentlemen with me tonight. One, you guys know Scott White, co-host of the very popular CBS Fantasy Baseball Today podcast. You could also call him White Hot Scott White, because for those that don't remember, he nailed the Tariq Skubal Cy Young call last year. I think before I heard it from anywhere else.
Yeah,
or
the September before.
That's right. Did you make a bet on it at all, or was
no?
It just...
I hope somebody else did, though.
Oh man, well, it was a very good prediction. Also, someone here that the Pitcher List community is very familiar with, Jake Crumpler. He does all things Pitcher List, the Going Deep manager. He podcasts for the First Pitch podcast and In the Pen podcast. He also does playing time analysis over at Baseball HQ. How's it going, man?
Going great. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. I mean, I know you guys didn't choose me, but I'm glad you guys are stuck with me. And I'm glad also that my glasses make me seem like a smart person. And I know Scott can probably relate to that, where people just automatically assume you're smart. It's not something that's bad. I'll take it all day.
You know, I don't usually wear my glasses. I just the last couple weeks I've had to. I haven't gotten any comments about it. I always, as somebody who normally wears contacts, I always feel like, kind of out of place in my glasses. Like everybody's going to be looking at me strange because I got this new part of my face. But it doesn't happen. People don't notice glasses as much as they used to, I feel like.
I feel like it's like someone like me who's not wearing the glasses, and now I feel out of place.
Yeah.
But look, we got two smart guys and one not smart guy.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, you know,
got a backwards hat. What is this about?
I'll talk like I know what I'm talking about, but let you guys do all the analysis here. As you guys know, diving in here, we're talking about SP sleepers tonight, starting pitcher sleepers. Before we actually dive into the actual sleepers, I'm interested to hear from your guys' perspective. Just drafting pitchers this year. I know every year sometimes it's like grab an elite starting pitcher early, like the hero SP strategy, or get great late. Or Scott, did you call it like the glamorous glob this year? Just like
the good glob is what I'm calling it. Yeah.
That there's a lot of great pitching later on to look at. What's your guys' strategy in terms of drafting starting pitching this year, starting with you, Scott?
Yeah, so I feel like, and this is not novel to fantasy baseball, but I feel like it's as true this year as it's ever been. The early round hitters, the high end impactful hitters are scarcer and more reliable. And so I kind of just want to keep taking them until they're all gone. And part of the reason for that is because of that good glob, this long stretch of the starting pitcher rankings. I kind of offhandedly call it 15 to 50 in my rankings, that to me are all about as attractive as each other. Like I have a hard time sorting out that very long stretch of the rankings. So usually by around round 5 or so, we get into that. And that's also about the time the really high end trustworthy hitters run out. So I just really hammer pitcher hard after that. Of course, because it is such a long stretch of the rankings that's difficult to distinguish between, that makes an exercise like this one, picking out sleeper pitchers, picking out, oh, that guy, that's the one I want. I'm specifically saying there aren't pitchers I'm singling out this year because they're all so alike. But here we are. We're going to talk sleeper pitchers.
Jake, what about you? What's your strategy with going into pitching this year?
I feel like as a member of the Pitcher List staff, I'm obligated to say I'm waiting on pitching. But for me, if I go into the details, you run a lot of risk when you're going after top tier pitching. The whole reason they're top tier is because they're more durable than other guys. But for me, there's too much risk placing that high of a draft pick in one player whose arm could fall off at any moment. And like Scott said, there's so many batters in the first few rounds that are very attractive, very leave me very eager to draft them. So I'm usually waiting on starters. Depends on the league, especially, but in my home leagues and in my really important leagues, that's something I'm waiting on. As Scott said, there's plenty of guys later on in the draft where last year it felt like we didn't really have that sort of group. Maybe there were less top tier guys than mid tier guys last year. But it feels like we have a continuation of that this year where you can get a lot of the similar value in a very wide range of picks.
Yeah, I think you guys hit the nail on the head. I think that's kind of where the industry seems like it's been going towards now is, again, like Scott mentioned, and you mentioned, Jake, the risk of taking pitcher early. Obviously, you could get a guy like Zach Wheeler, who's been, pretty consistent the last few years and durable, throwing a lot of innings. But then there's the guys like the Paul Skeens, who had a sensational rookie season last year, and now he's priced as about a late first, early second round pick. And you go and you draft him, and then all of a sudden something happens and he gets shut down next year, and there goes your first round pick up in flames. So with how great pitching has become over the years and just the quality of pitching, I think it's not a bad idea to wait. So for those that do like to wait, it's why you guys are tuning into this portion, because you want to know, who am I supposed to wait on and who am I going to try to snag from my friends in my draft? And kind of when they look back on the season, man, I can't believe you got this player in the 10th round. You got this player in the 12th round. So Scott, start with you. Is there the first sleeper you want to talk about? Is there a player, your number one sleeper, or is this a player you feel like, what do we got to start the show with here?
I will go with my favorite sleeper, I guess. I could go with my favorite sleeper or my highest end sleeper, just start at kind of the top of the rankings. But let's go with my favorite one. And I think my favorite sleeper for this year, one who I actually think is you can get a real value in a year where every starting pitcher seems like a value, is Spencer Arrighetti. Mm-hmm. And I think what's going on with him, why he's not being properly appreciated in drafts, is people just look at the overall numbers. They see the 4.53 ERA, they see the 1.41 WHIP, and they're like, yuck, I don't want any part of that. But of course, they're overlooking the strikeout potential here. Spencer Arrighetti had more double-digit strikeout efforts last year than either Tarek Skubal or Paul Skeens. He had 4 of them. And as bad as the 4.53 overall ERA is, final 10 appearances for Spencer Arrighetti, 2.72 ERA, 1.17 WHIP, 11.4 K per 9. The WHIP's still a little high. He had, his control wasn't great, but he got away from throwing his junky fastball so much. And the curveball, the sweeper, they're great. They're close to unhittable, or at least they were last year. So if Arrighetti can stick to that approach with that natural strikeout ability, I think he has the potential to be an impactful pitcher for you at a pretty low price.
Yeah, Arrighetti is. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Jake.
Sure, Arrighetti is. He's pretty dope. I like how dope his fastball is, despite how hard it gets hit. I think that's a direct product of his lack of control there. But if he can keep that pitch upstairs and maybe focus more on the secondaries, like Scott said, reduce the fastball usage and just focus on those secondaries that get a ton of whiffs, especially with a cutter that can earn strikes as well. He's got tools across the board to be an elite strikeout arm.
And just like you guys mentioned, again, look at the season-long numbers, not necessarily overwhelming, but like Scott, you mentioned how he finished the year and a 27% strikeout rate, 30% CSW, swinging strike rate over 13%. Nick has him ranked 63rd going into this season, and he's a pretty good value looking over on the NFBC right now. I think he's a great pick to start this one off with. I kind of associated him and Spencer Schwallenbach. They were kind of like the two guys. I feel like at the end of last year, they kind of tied them together. Both guys are
Spencer's with difficult last names to spell.
Yes. Both guys look like they're great values going into this season. Jake, who's your first pick?
Mine is Gavin Williams. When I was writing him up, the first sentence I wrote is, "This is my sleeper pick for 2025." So that makes it clear for you guys. This was my number one pick. He is tall, which I think helps him get a lot of extension and makes his upper 90s fastball look even harder, and that pitch dominates wherever it's thrown, and it's usually thrown for strike. So he really dominates with the fastball. And then last year he introduced a game-changing cutter, and that pitch really thrives off his curve with the heater. And I think the more he leans on the cutter, the more success he's going to have, because it's a pitch that he can throw for strikes and can, reduce the ability for left-handers to take him deep. So it's a really good 3-pitch mix. And I think if he gets a full healthy season next year, it's going to be really difficult for batters to do anything against that upper 90s heater and hammer curve.
Do you, Jake, think he's going to take a step in terms of his control? Because whip last year over 1.3, walk rate, each of his first 2 seasons right around double digits. Do you sense a step in the positive direction for that?
Yeah, for me, I think it's a product of being in a rhythm. I think this is a guy who's been dealing with injuries and unexpected call-ups to the majors, where 2023 he only had 16 starts, and same in 2024. So there's clearly a situation where in 2023 he's coming up from the minors. There's a big change there. And then also 2024 dealing with injuries, late start to the season. I feel like that's a big product of the lack of control through the last couple of years, was the inconsistency in his role and his inconsistency in being on the field. So I think a full season and a full normal off season will allow him to come into 2025 with improved command.
I like it. I think he has the potential to be one of, if not the best pitcher on that staff, if he reaches it, based on his prospect pedigree, based on his strikeout stuff. We've seen flashes of it. And the Cleveland pitching staff seems like every year now it's getting hurt, a ton of their top end pitchers. So if Gavin Williams can step up, maybe even make, 25 to 30 starts for them next year, he could be a real value in fantasy drafts. Scott, who are we going with our next pick?
So let's go with a higher end one, Bailey Ober, who is being drafted just outside, right around 30th at starting pitcher. So he's within that good glob, but I think he's similar to a lot of the guys at the top of the good glob when he's trending toward the bottom. I'm going to start with I'm going to start by doing a thing that a lot of people don't like. I'm going to tell you that Bailey Ober, if you remove just 2 starts from his ledger, his ERA goes from 3.98 to 3.18. So that's for starters. Now, a lot of people don't like that because the starts count, whatever. If you take a good way to start from him, you got to take a start away from this guy. I think that underestimates, though, the fine line between success and failure in baseball, and also just the role that sheer randomness plays. Like, especially one of those 2 starts was his first start of the season. Tons of emotional baggage, tons of just like approach baggage went into that as he was transitioning from build up to competitive mode. So I think, we give him a pass for that. 3.18 ERA if you just take away those 2 instead of 3.98. And then all of a sudden his stat line looks a lot more impressive. If you're not compelled, if you're not convinced by that, though, let me also add a comparison to Shota Imanaga here. So Bailey Ober had the 3.98 ERA, Shota Imanaga 2.91, more than a full run lower. But these are fairly similar profiles in terms of them being elite control pitchers with fly ball tendencies who strike out batters at a average to above average rate, like pretty good strikeouts. And they're very similar in that regard. And if you look at their expected ERA last year, Ober's was actually better. Ober's was 3.22 versus Imanaga's 3.39. I think they're so similar, and the full run difference in ERA between the 2 of them speaks mostly to just variance. It was basically happenstance, and if the 2 of them flipped ERAs this year, it wouldn't shock me. And that would obviously make Bailey Ober the much better value on draft day.
I do want to comment on Bailey Ober, but I want to see what Jake wants to add, if there's anything he would like to add on Bailey Ober.
Yeah, I mean, he's really tall, and he's really good as well.
Tall guys.
Yeah. There's actually a joke I have here. He's really tall and really good with room to grow, but he's already so tall.
Okay.
There you go. Can I get the buttons?
Yeah.
No, I loved Ober last year, and I loved how good he was the whole season. I really feel like he's underrated. I feel like it's got something to do with his name. It's a name that you just look over, you don't think of as an ace or something. I'm trying to get my mind into the
Bailey Ogre, like big
Overrated.
Bailey Ogre.
Overrated. There we see.
Yeah.
We're already solving it. I think he's really good. I think everything Scott said is right, and I might as well take out all his starts, and then he has a 0 ERA, right?
That's true. Well, long story short here, I've been Twins fan my whole life, and they've let me down every single year. It's always, I think, one of the most frustrating teams to root for, to the point where I'm pretty much numb when it comes to them. And Bailey Ober's giving me a little bit of excitement going into this year. I think his changeup is elite. He had a 40.5% whiff rate on it during his hot stretch in August, and that ranked only behind Cole Reagans and Tariq Skubal over that time. No pitcher had a lower expected batting average against that pitch, with a 158 batting average against his changeup. And his season-long numbers, like at the end of the day, like a 3.98 ERA and nearly 200 strikeouts, like that's with those two huge blow-up starts, So like Bailey Ober, I obviously would love if he was a little bit ranked, past 100. The fact that he's in the top 100, I think people are very well aware of what he can do. But man, I think sky's the limit for this kid. Like you said, Jake, he's tall, which means, he's getting good extension on his pitches. It's just less time for the hitters to be able to pick up what he's throwing. He throws hard, got good deception. Give me all the Bailey Ober this year. Scott, are you going to make sure? I'm pretty sure he's your Cy Young pick this year, right?
I did make that prediction in the same article that I made the prediction for Tariq Skubal the previous year. And then I think Bailey Ober had a couple of ugly starts that blew up his numbers again. Not the two I eliminated, by the way. So, I didn't take all the bad starts out. I'm not as convinced of that as I was Tariq Skubal. I will not be putting money down on that particular prediction.
All right, fair enough. But if he does get the Cy Young, I will still next year credit you for, again.
Either way, I win in that case.
I like that pick. Jake, who is your next player?
We're going to stick with the Twins. I'm going with David Festa. He's going near pick 300. Also, no guarantee makes the rotation, but he was very interesting last year in a small sample of 13 starts, 14 games. 4.90 ERA, not great, but he showed some interesting stuff. His fastball is pretty dope as long as he keeps it upstairs, because it gets absolutely pummeled down in the zone. So for me, I think if he can pull off the Blake Snell blueprint of heaters upstairs and breakers down low, with the changeups kept arm side and the sliders glove side, then he's got legit potential, not just to be a strikeout guy, but to be a really good fantasy starter, because all three of his pitches are earning whiffs. So he really just needs to make sure he's earning strikes, and the four-seamer does that just fine, but it's really up to the slider remaining in the zone, or at least just getting those swings and misses out of the zone, so that he has 65% strike pitches, and then you're not really worried about his walk rate. To me, that seems like pretty easy fixes. Get your fastball upstairs and just throw some strikes. I'm skeptical though, because he's young and doesn't have a lot of experience in the majors and wasn't able to do it last year, that he's going to be able to fix his fastball location and retain the feel for his secondaries. But I think he's legit, and PLV agrees. Pitcher List's stat that it's an all-encompassing stat for pitches. All three of his pitches are in the top 30th percentile according to PLV. So he's got a pretty good base to build off of, and has already had a little small taste of the majors. So he should take some steps forward next year, and that Minnesota Twins rotation could be absolutely unhittable.
Yeah, you mentioned, I think it'll be a festival over in Minnesota next year, because you look at that rotation. You have obviously the three guys up top: Pablo Lopez, Joe Ryan, Bailey Ober. Pablo Lopez, ace. He's going to have some bad starts, but overall going to have most likely a good season. Hurt. Bailey Ober, we just talked about. Joe Ryan is supposed to come into the year healthy, but he's coming off a Terry's major lat injury, and that is far from a guarantee that he's going to be fully healthy next year. Then you get to the rest. This is like the bad glob here, like Scott would say. Like, you have Simeon Woods Richardson, you have Chris Paddock, you have Zebby Matthews, you have David Festa. Most likely those four guys are fighting for two spots. I would give Chris Paddock probably one of those spots based on the fact that he's the eldest of the group, the fact that he has a contract that's well higher than the rest of this group here. So I would think that he is going to most likely get the 4th spot, which leaves one spot open with SWRs, Zebby Matthews, and David Festa. David Festa is by far ranked in terms of ADP way higher than the other two. Zebby Matthews has some K upside, but he was extremely underwhelming last year. And then Simeon Woods Richardson did have a stretch where he was decent for fantasy, but he was never giving you high strikeouts. He was inconsistent towards the end of the season. Also, he headlines a very underwhelming package the Twins got back for Jose Barrios, but that's another story. I think David Festa, to me, as it stands today, has the inside track to get that 5th starter job. And based on what Jake was saying, kind of how he looked last year in flashes, and he will need to go deeper into games because he didn't do that as often as I think we would have liked for fantasy. But I think David Festa definitely, if I had to say today, I think he does get one of those spots in the rotation. And I think, an ADP that's going after 300 last time I checked, I think that's a pretty good value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's one I've kind of been waiting on because I don't know how the Twins rotation is going to shake out. They have a lot of options, as you say, but he's the one I'm rooting for in those final 2 spots to claim one, because I agree, David Festa, the most exciting of that group.
Yeah, I think, time will tell. I'm sure that 5th spot, they'll all pitch, and whoever looks the best in spring training is going to probably get it. But David Festa, you would think, hopefully has an inside track on that as it stands today. Scott, I don't know if you got another Minnesota Twin or if you're going a different direction. Who's your next pick?
I probably should go a little further down the rankings because Jake has gone so much deeper than me so far. So I'll try to catch up here, and I will say Clay Holmes is a sleeper for me this year. And I feel like he hasn't gotten much attention signing with the Mets to be a starter after those years as an on-again, off-again closer with the Yankees. Even after last year where we had Reynaldo Lopez and Michael King and Garrett Crochet, for goodness sakes, make the transition from relief to starting and thrive. I don't know that Clay Holmes is going to be that high end, but I do think he's going to succeed. Obviously, it was a struggle for him closing. That's why he was on again, off again. But 3.14 ERA last year. During his entire time in the Yankees bullpen, Clay Holmes had a 2.69 ERA. So he was good at run prevention. I think the reason those ninth innings became stressful for Clay Holmes is because he's not the big bat misser we're used to seeing in the ninth inning. And he gets most of the batted balls, the vast majority of the batted balls are ground balls, which ground balls have a chance of sneaking through the infield, becoming singles. And, with the game on the line, that stuff gets magnified. And so it didn't work out for him as a closer, but I think over extended stretches, that profile is going to play a lot better. That run prevention is going to stand out more. 65% ground ball rate for Clay Holmes last year. And it's been higher than that in the past. Really, the only full-time starting pitcher who can compete with that kind of ground ball rate is Framber Valdez. And so I think at least on a per inning basis, we're going to see pretty similar numbers from Clay Holmes. Obviously, going from relief to starting, he's not equipped yet to give you the kind of volume Framber Valdez gives, but obviously a small fraction of the cost. And I think you're going to be happy with the ERA Clay Holmes gives you.
In a way, it's kind of nice that he's not necessarily a bat misser. And I know we like that for fantasy, but for someone that is going to probably have to build up over time, and for someone that is going from being a reliever most of his career to going back to starting here, you want a guy that maybe, hey, he's going to go 5 or 6 innings because he's limiting his amount of pitches that he's not trying to strike people out. And he's going to a team in the Mets that has one of the best infield defenses if you look up the middle, headlined by Francisco Lindor. So he's on the right team for that. So.
Yeah, especially if Mark Vientos ends up moving to first base, as I think is the current plan. If he has to stick at third, maybe that wouldn't be so great for Holmes. But even so, I like him.
Yeah, he looks like a great pick, and again, a low-cost pick here, so it's not like you have to spend a ton of capital to get him. Jake, what about you? Your next pick?
My next one is going to be Nick Pivetta, and for me, I really just like that. I am. I'm going there. And I think it's because he's going somewhere else. I think escaping Fenway is going to be huge for him. Both Fenway and Citizens Bank are pretty high home run environments. And that's really how Pavetta's whole career has been aligned. It's been aligned with his home run to fly ball rate. And generally that's really high. He's a big fly ball guy and he allows loud contact. So of course he's going to give up a lot of home runs. But if you look at throughout his career, it's always incredibly high home run to fly ball rates, which usually can come down to earth if you can get a guy in a pitcher friendly ballpark or maybe just a less hitter friendly ballpark. So I think that's, step number one for Pavetta's breakout season, or at least just being a promising fantasy guy who's going close to pick 200. Just in terms of his stuff, his four seamer is awesome. And with his sleeper, he gets a ton of whiffs. And I always think that his curveball is super underrated. I swear every time I see a highlight of that curveball, I cannot believe that's not the best pitch in baseball. It's got so much drop and it's so sudden, and somehow it doesn't get a lot of whiffs, but it does catch hitters off guard to steal strikes. So I guess the fact that it took me off guard makes a lot of sense there. I'm also sort of surprised to see that he had a career low walk rate last year without a secondary strike pitch that he can rely on, where his heater is really the only, number one strike pitch for him. But I really think just the move out of out of this ballpark could give him a much better chance of being a player that's not so reliant on home runs. Like, he's never had a home run to fly ball rate less than 14% since going to Boston. So I'm just subscribing to the idea that reduces just enough to make his ERA manageable, and everything else is great. So there's nothing right. He had a 1.13 whip and a 29% strikeout rate last year. So as long as the ERA comes down, I think we're looking at a much better pitcher.
Yeah, you mentioned the strikeout rate was great. Has always shown that he has the stuff through periods of time. It's just never been able to sustain it over a full season. It's like the two-faced villain from Batman. Like, you can get the good Nick Pivetta, you get the bad Nick Pivetta. And I would say, once he goes to a different team, if he goes to a team that's shown they've been able to work with pitching really well, like that ADP is going to skyrocket. You read an article that says he's, working on a new pitch, or that he's found something mechanically that he didn't realize he was doing, like that. Those are the type of stuff that can come out with that type of upside that he possesses. And you're looking at someone that's going to it's January 30th, come draft season, come March, like he could be one of the biggest risers from now to then. When all that information starts coming out. So Nick Pivetta definitely always tantalizing. Hopefully this is the year Nick Pivetta. We talk about him and then he does it the whole season.
I know. I'm afraid, like, just last year I went in so hard for Nick Pivetta, and it not for the first time, by the way.
Yeah. I learned my lesson. 2019 was.
Yeah.
Has he arguably been the most frustrating pitcher in fantasy baseball over the last 3 years? I can't think of more than him.
Probably guys that are more frustrating because they're good and you have even higher expectations of them. I feel like everybody's reduced their expectations for Pivetta, though he is very frustrating.
I feel like Sonny Gray has always been difficult to pin down. Always good, but not necessarily as good or in the ways you expect him to be good. So frustrating in a different sort of way.
Yeah, that's fair. But yeah, no, hopefully Nick Pivetta, this is the year you fully turn it around and give us a full season of being good for our fantasy teams. Scott, going down the list, who catches your eye next here?
All right, we'll stay on the deeper end of the pool here with Cody Bradford. And I'm going to make a pretty lofty comparison here with Cody Bradford. There are three pitchers that, to me, I'm constantly comparing to each other. I mentioned them already. Bailey Ober, Shota Imanaga are two of them. Bryce Miller, the other. And that profile I mentioned before, all three of them, they have elite control. They have fly ball tendencies. They have average to above average strikeout ability. And we know that's a profile that works in fantasy because of them and because of others who share that profile. There's some ERA risk with it, but going to have a stellar whip and overall just be a solid option for you. I think Cody Bradford shares that profile, and basically nobody's paying attention to him. Strikeout rate a little lower for him than those three last year, 8.3 per 9. Again, average to above average. The whip was 101 with all those outs on contact, with the high fly ball rate, with the low walk rate. 101 whip for Cody Bradford, and he went deep into games consistently. Once he came back from the strained back he was dealing with for most of the year, 6 to 7 inning starts consistently for Cody Bradford. Sort of like David Festa. I don't feel like he's guaranteed a rotation spot for the Rangers, but as I said, solid down the stretch last year. So I think he'll have the advantage over a Kumar Rocker or a Jack Leiter in winning a spot in that rotation. And if he does, I think Cody Bradford's going to be really reliable and a great find. I think he's going outside pick 4/100. Just totally slept on.
A lot of great peripherals there. A 3.36 expected ERA, a 3.59 FIP. Had a 1.01 whip, as you mentioned, which is a great whip. CSW over 30%. A lot of great stuff to like there. And if I remember, wasn't he probably one of the most added pitchers? Was it after like the first week or two when he started out on that great run before he got hurt? So we saw the flashes there to start the year.
I don't think I was buying it then, but later in the year when he came back and I got a glimpse at those peripherals again, I was sold on Cody Bradford.
Yeah, Cody Bradford definitely has some appeal there. Like you mentioned, Scott, we'll have to keep an eye if he does get a spot out of spring training. The way he did finish the year last year and what we saw in certain spots, looks like he could definitely get a shot at that rotation. Jake, who is your next player?
I'm going one which I'm trying to meet Scott midway in the ADP here. I'm going with Ryan Pepio. So I'm climbing up. He's got an ADP of 165 since January 1st in Draft Champions. So he's not going super late. So it depends on your definition of sleeper.
No, that's fine. I'm on the other side of the coin with Ryan Pepio. So this will be interesting.
All right. Well, I was big on him last year. I feel like him going from the Dodgers to the Rays was very interesting to me. It's always so weird when one really advanced front office lets go of a player and another really advanced front office takes them in. You're always wondering, what kind of metrics do they have that are so different from this other really advanced team that they're going to see something different in them. Nonetheless, the Rays found something in Pepio, and when he was healthy, he was really good last year. And I feel like that debut last year was very underrated. He had a 3.60 ERA, 1.15 whip, and a 26% strikeout rate in 26 starts. And with the, a lot of shuffling around in the Rays rotation, your ace now, Shane McClanahan, coming off Tommy John surgery. Pepio might be one of the guys relied on to be eating innings because they don't have a lot of guys that are, major league innings eaters. So there's that going for him. Outside of that, his stuff is really good. His fastball has gorgeous shape and he locates it upstairs for whiffs and a lot of pop-ups, which I like. So you get a little bit of weak contact there. And then he's got a nasty changeup and a developing slider. So he's got that triangular method of attack that I really like because it allows you to not have disparate splits between lefties and righties. You can attack them on both sides of the zone and upstairs with the heater. The concern for me is that there's a really heavy reliance on the fastball to get strikes. And so that could lead to further control issues if the heater's getting pummeled and then he has to turn to his secondaries and he can't throw those for strikes. That's my biggest concern for him, especially having already had a 9% walk rate last year. But I think the cutter that he added late last season is going to be the big game changer because he was able to throw that for strikes consistently. And I think that will take some of the heat off the heater. And then he will really be able to dominate with the change in slider as whiff pitches.
So I think all of that would be persuasive to me if they were still playing at Tropicana Field.
Sure.
But
Where
since
are they playing?
they're going to be playing at George M. Steinbrenner Field, spring training facility, same dimensions as Yankee Stadium, short porch and right field. But I imagine it's going to be even more homer friendly to lefties because in that Florida humidity, that ball's going to just cut through the air. I think it's going to be a launching pad, and I think Pepio is of all the Rays pitchers, him and Taj Bradley, really going to suffer from that. Among pitchers who threw at least 130 innings last year, which was the exact number Pepio threw, 10th highest fly ball rate. His xFIP, which heavily weighs fly ball rate, Pepio 405 last year. And I think in that very homer-friendly environment, his ERA is going to play close to that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Scott, you mentioned the new ballpark. Pepio, I think, was kind of, people were talking about, him going to the Rays, and people were expecting this big breakout last year. And, he was decent through stretches, but he is interesting because his ADP, I don't think is unfair where he's ranked. But again, maybe like you're saying, Scott, just because of the factors outside of his control, or the fact of how he pitches in just an unfortunate situation, it creates a little bit of a chance that it could be a problem there outside just his own skill set. So this is, I think, the first time we've had a kind of opposing viewpoint here on Ryan Pepe, on a player. So this is kind of interesting. It
is interesting. How do you feel? Like, do you think the cutter, I assume you're hoping will help the strikeout ability? It's not going to add ground balls though. And all.
No. For me, it's just throwing more strikes. So just avoiding the extra base runners.
General. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, more solo home runs, I guess, than 2 and 3 run shots.
That's right.
I think we are all very anxious to see, once they play in their new ballpark, just how different the numbers go next season. Like, is it going to be one of those that we're like, we didn't expect this? Like, we expected some regression in terms of numbers for pitchers because of the new ballpark, but maybe it's more than we expect. Maybe it's less than we expect. So, I'm sure we'll be adjusting as the season progresses here. Scott, let's go to another player here. Who's next on the list?
Well, I've done my lowest int ones already, so we'll get back in the good glob here with Sean Manaea, who may even be outside of that good glob for some people. Sean Manaea is a pitcher who I think in most years in a normal pitching, a normal pitcher pool, people might reluctantly buy into because they need to chase upside somewhere. And so since we don't have that pitcher pool now, people are kind of happy to avoid him. But his transformation last year was so thorough that it's hard for me not to buy into it. Basically, if you haven't heard the story for Sean Manaea, July 25th, he's having an okay season to that point. But, 33-year-old he'll be this year, pretty mediocre track record. Not really blowing anybody away. July 25th last year, he sees a Chris Sale start live in person and says, I want what that guy has. And just immediately drops his arm on his delivery, adopts that low 3/4 delivery. And it just clicks right away for him. And from that point forward, final 12 starts for Sean Manaea, 3.09 ERA, 0.85 whip, 9.9 K per 9. His swinging strike rate went from 11%, very middling before making that change, to 14% elite after the change. And it makes sense. I mean, if he's able to do it successfully, you drop that arm down, you get that optimal vertical approach angle to get people swinging under the fastball. And he just dominated. And I think because it's such a complete change for Manaea, it's almost like we can't even really use earlier data to assess him. It's like he's a completely different pitcher now. Maybe the league catches up to it this year and he regresses because of that. That's possible, but the cost is such that I don't think you really need to worry about that. The reward outweighs the risk.
Yeah, and there's 2 factors also weighing in his favor. He's been pretty durable over his he didn't start in 2022 for the Padres in 2023 for the Giants. Only made 10 starts out of his 37 appearances, but 2021 with Oakland, 32 starts. 2022 with San Diego, 28 starts in 30 games total. And then last year with the Mets, 32 starts. So he's been very durable. There's a tangible change, like you mentioned, Scott, with the arm angle and the fact that it wasn't just like a month. It wasn't like it was a couple weeks. It was a pretty long period of time at the end of the season. He sustained it. And the Mets just gave him a new contract. So if he does struggle, they have reason to try to let him figure it out because they just invested in him. So,
well, and they had a front row seat for that transformation. So if any team knows how likely it is to stick, you'd think it'd be the Mets.
And they didn't let him linger in free agency. He was, I feel like, one of the first free agents signed. So if that doesn't speak that they have confidence in what they saw, I don't know what else does. So Sean and I have heard people saying that they don't think he can repeat it for the full year, that that they're not buying in. But I think when you see the results and you see the Mets investment and you see, again, it's a very tangible thing you can pick up on. I'm in with you, Scott. I think he kind of teased us a couple of years ago. I was really in when he went to the Giants because I thought he was going to adopt the seam shift wake approach, and I kind of thought he was going to put it together with the Giants, and he didn't. And it seems like he found what works for him, and I'm excited to. I think he'll be good for your fantasy teams this season. So I like the pick there. Jake, do you like Sean Manaea? Do you got the Manaea fever, or what are your feelings here?
Yeah, I don't think I'm as crazy about Manaea as Scott is. Not that he's crazy or as enthusiastic about it. That's a better word choice there. I feel like the only problem I have is that it feels like a lot of his success comes from deception and maybe players not seeing him as much. So I try to do some research on whether or not in the playoffs, when those teams saw him twice, whether or not he was better or worse. And what I found was that his final 2 starts of the year came against Philly and Milwaukee. And then those were the teams he faced in the playoffs. And he was better in the playoffs against them than he was in the regular season. But then with the Dodgers, he was good in the first start and bad in the second start. So it's sort of a mixed bag. Yeah. But he was good in the first start against them. So that says something about how the deception can take out anyone. But once you learn it, it's easy to counter. So for me, I'm going to be watching him very closely. I won't be afraid to draft him. I'm not going to jump him up my draft board. I'll take him around his ADP. But then when he's on my team, I'm not going to second guess. Once you see a couple starts in a row that aren't going your way, I'm probably going to jump ship and just say they figured him out.
And the Mets don't have a crazy amount of depth either. It's not like they're swimming in pitching. They have some great positional prospects, but their pitching depth isn't something that they have a great amount of. So again, if he does struggle a little bit, they might, figure other ways to make sure he's still starting and getting a chance to fix whatever goes on. Because like you mentioned, you could see something at the end of the season, or teams could be watching stuff in the off season and try to pick something up with his deceptive delivery. But then he gets the chance to combat that, and maybe he throws a pitch more. Maybe, he goes, heavier with something that he wasn't last year, or, maybe mechanically he's tipping his pitches and he wasn't realizing he does. So it's, you can kind of, make adjustments as you go along. Jake, go back to you. Any other sleepers you would like to talk about?
Yeah, sure. Let's talk about Robbie Ray. I think he's being slept on mostly because he's going around like pick 150. So nothing crazy, but there's something about him that feels like he could have the Sean Manaea or Carlos Rodon-esque Giants breakout that we've seen with multiple lefties. I mean, we saw it with Alex Wood even. And if you want to throw in righties there, we can say Kevin Gossman as well. They've been doing this with veteran guys who, have sort of lost their way and come to San Francisco and find it again. And we saw a little bit of it last year. He came back and he got his heater back up over 94 miles per hour, and it had improved shape, and he located it super well upstairs. So all of that great combination there. He paired it with the slider and the curve low in the zone. So that's great. BSB, Blake Snell blueprint there. And that allowed him to be one of the best whiff inducers in baseball. 17.6% strikeout or swinging strike rate during that time, which produced a 33% strikeout rate. So definitely an elite whiff arm, elite strikeout rate. And just considering the Giants past history gives me a lot more confidence that small sample success will continue into next year. My only concern is that he is guaranteed to walk too many guys, which is going to cap his whip ceiling, but his ability to produce in 3 categories is super intriguing.
He's in an interesting range too. I'm looking at NFBC ADP over the last couple weeks. He's going right in the range with Yusei Kikuchi, who is now with the Angels. He goes right after him. He's also going right around Ronaldo Lopez, Kevin Gausman, Ryan Pepio. I think this is, I'm looking at that group, and I think to me, he's the most appealing of that group based on the upside that he could give if he controls his walks. I mean, he's a former Cy Young Award winner. He's a great strikeout pitcher. He also has a better team. Like I look at, Yusei Kikuchi, who did look better when he went to Houston, but he's also pitching for the Angels. and a much better division in terms of hitting. I think to me, out of the guys I mentioned, he's the most appealing. You said what the Giants have been able to do with pitching. I know, obviously last year, kind of a small sample size, didn't look great. I remember one outing, he I think didn't even make it out of the first inning, just he was walking so many guys. But I like the upside, and I like the chance to see what he could do in a full season with them. Scott,
what were some of the pitchers you named in that area? You say Kikuchi and
Kikuchi, Ronaldo Lopez, Kevin Gausman, Ryan Pepio.
Ryan Pepio. Okay, so some I like, some I don't like. Because I find that I'm just not drafting Robbie Ray because there's always another pitcher I want more. I know Sean Manai is going a little after for instance, so I would take Manai over him. And it's the upside for Robbie Ray. It's hard to dispute, but it's the downside risk that concerns me. All the health issues, all the fact that even when he's healthy, sometimes control can get the better of him. I think the cost is fine. I think obviously it could be a huge payoff. But starting pitcher being in the state it's in, I tend to gravitate towards some of those others. Even Reynaldo Lopez, and maybe I'd kind of be interesting to hear Jake's take on Reynaldo Lopez, because the knee-jerk reaction is, oh, he's obviously going to regress. He had a 1.99 ERA. How much regression? Because a 3.12 ERA, that's still a pretty good pitcher. And I really liked what we saw from him in August and September as he was dealing with the shoulder inflammation, the elbow inflammation, went on the IL twice. And yet in between those IL stints, his strikeout rate he was getting like 14K per nine. His swinging strike rate went way up. He was suddenly dominating in a way he wasn't the rest of the year that made us so skeptical of the ERA. So not to put you on the spot, Jake, how do you feel about Reynaldo Lopez?
Yeah, I'm sort of in the same boat where I'm like, he's gonna regress. It's a matter of how much, and I think a lot of it is going to be tied to whether or not he's got the same feel for his secondaries. I think his fastball is fine, but it's not something you want to rely on in the zone all the time, and it's really his only strike pitch. So for me, without another pitch to get him strikes, he's really heavily reliant on those secondaries, which are fine and dandy, but they're not overpowering stuff. I think he's fine. To use Nick's terminology, he's probably going to be a Holly, around 25% strikeout rate with decent ratios, but nobody that's, blowing your socks off. So for me, I'm probably moving Reynaldo down my ranks. I haven't adjusted them in a couple weeks. But after doing some more research on him, I'm not as high, but he's safe to me.
Okay.
Interesting. All right. So we'll see.
Safe. I like, you don't hear a lot of people describe him as safe, but I guess he is safe in a way.
Yeah. Where it's like, he's not going to, maybe it's more predictable also seems wrong. His range of outcomes seems small.
Okay. Yeah. I hear what you're saying.
Do we think that we got a lot more starts out of Reynaldo Lopez than we all expected last year? Do we think that at some point comes to bite us in the butt this year?
Well, I think that would be the biggest downside risk with Lopez, is just how durable is he going to be? Like I said, as dominant as he was in April and September, he went on the IL twice. And only that was in a year where his innings, what was he, like 135?
Correct.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's the biggest question for me, more so than performance, is can Lopez hold up?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the actual results we saw from him in terms of the numbers, I don't think we're each concerned about that. I think, like you said, Scott, the durability aspect is going to be the big.
As long as you're understanding, 1.99 ERA is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But 3.12 again. Yeah, I'd take that.
Yeah. Why don't we try and cover each one more sleeper here? Scott, who is the last sleeper you would like to get into?
Let's see. You kind of talked about Spencer Schwellenbach already, and I'm not sure sleeper is the most appropriate categorization for him anyway. Another kind of high-end one that I think you could more accurately say people are sleeping on is Justin Steele, who went from being an obvious Cy Young contender in 2023, and then last year he kind of became an afterthought. But if you look at just the three main numbers we look at with starting pitchers, ERA, WHIP, K per 9. The average person looks at for pitchers, I guess. The three numbers there: 3.06 ERA, 117 WHIP, 9.1 K per 9 for Justin Steele. That was in 2023. 301, 117, 9.1. Last year, 307, 110 WHIP, 9.0 K per 9. It could not be closer. He basically put up the exact same line. So I think the biggest difference in how he's been perceived in fantasy is in 2023, Justin Steele won 53% of his starts. Last year, he won only 21%. Had some good luck, I would say, in terms of wins and losses 2 years ago. Had really bad luck in terms of wins and losses last year. If he finds the middle ground there, I think he's going to be a great value. And he is somebody I often find myself drafting within that good club.
Jake, what do you think about Justin Steele?
I'm somewhat concerned that he's just a two-pitch pitcher. Neither of the pitches is really so dominant, but he's so good at commanding his pitches that he does get the most out of them. So for me, if really anything changes, if he loses some of the shape or velocity on his fastball, or maybe he's not able to locate his slider as effectively as he did last year, it could be a quick fall off. And also, I don't really see his ceiling as being super high because of the two-pitch mix. But as Scott mentioned, he is about as reliable as it gets, where you pretty much know what you're going to get from him if he maintains the skills that he's displayed across the past 2 seasons. So that's obviously a caveat for any pitcher going into the next season. Are they going to show what they showed last year? Yeah, that's probably the question we should ask about anybody. But for somebody with just 2 pitches, that question becomes more important. So for me, he's fine where he's going. I think he's reliable, but there is concern that there's nowhere for him to go except down.
How interesting is it that he had a 3.05 ERA each to the last 2 years to the number? I feel like he's been pretty consistent since he broke out. What was at the end of 2022 when he the second half? I mean, that's a pretty prolonged time to succeed. And as Scott mentioned, that near Cy Young campaign he had a couple of years ago. Last year, the wins weren't there. The Cubs offense has gotten a lot better, I think.
Kyle Tucker.
And now they're trying to recruit Alex Bregman there.
Sure.
I mean,
I don't know that I think Alex Bregman might suffer there the way Isaac Paredes did, but yeah, in theory, that's an upgrade.
Yeah. So I think Justin Steele is kind of a value here. I'm with you, Scott. I think, the numbers were still decent last year. Jake, I understand your point because, he's very dependent on that slider. And if that slider, becomes a problem, then is he going to be the same pitcher? But the fact is that he's been throwing that slider a crazy amount ever since he broke out, and it's still been effective. So I feel like at this point, if they haven't been able to figure out that slider, I think the only thing that could slow him down would be if he were to get hurt. So I think, you getting him right now, he's ranked as this obviously includes relievers, but he's ranked as the 51st pitcher over on NFBC over the last 2 weeks. I think that's a pretty good value here for him for what he could do for your team.
Yep. I love it. I get it. And maybe that's part of the reason why he's undervalued is because if you're doing the pitch breakdown, he doesn't so much shine there, but back-to-back years of virtually identical stat line, except for the win-loss record. Yeah, I'm buying in.
I think he's going to be great. Jake, who's your last sleeper?
All right. I had to pull this one out of a hat, but I feel very confident about this one. It's Sandy Alcantara, one of my favorite pitchers over the last few years. He's coming off Tommy John surgery, and that's allowed for a huge discount on ADP. In the past month, we're looking at around pick 158. So that's pretty late. The 66th pitcher off the board. There's, lots of concerns around injured pitchers. There's lots of concerns around somebody like Sandy, who's not a big strikeout guy, especially pitching for the Marlins. He's not going to get you a lot of wins either, or is unlikely to. However, his stuff is just so undeniably good that if he's got even a semblance of what he had before the Tommy John surgery, he's going to be one of the most dominant pitch to contact guys in baseball. That sinker at 100 miles per hour is very reminiscent of somebody like Zach Wheeler, where he's able to get people in on the hands and he can throw the four seamer upstairs and then, just rip off a slider or a change up to a righty or a lefty and get the whiffs that he needs to. I would love to see him switch things up a little bit so he could be more of a strikeout arm, but I've always loved exactly what he does. And if he can just be somebody that I can rely on for good ratios, then I'm all in.
ADP of 166 over the last couple of weeks over on NFBC. He's actually going right in that same range of pitchers we were just talking about with Kikuchi, Ray, Ronaldo Lopez. He goes a little bit before them. But we know the upside, this Cy Young winner, like you said, Jake, maybe the strikeout stuff. We would like to see a little bit more of that. But the positive sign is, as reading news today, he's going to be ready for the start of spring training. So it's not like he's going to miss any part of the season as it stands today. So you get a guy with that type of ceiling going after pick 160. I could think of worse ways to spend that pick. So I think Sandy Alcantara after pick 160 is a good value here. What do you think, Scott? You agree with that?
No, not really.
Let's go.
And I didn't want to make a big thing of it because I get it. The biggest selling point for Sandy Alcantara for me before he had Tommy John surgery was he takes on a huge workload more than any other pitcher in baseball. And he's obviously not going to do that coming off Tommy John surgery. The Marlins would be crazy to ask him to do that. Like that's just not going to be part of it. And so then, okay, what else does he have going for him? Great ground ball guy. Yes, probably the ERA is going to be nice. But he always underwhelmed in the strikeout department, so he's not going to do that for you. And it's going to be magnified by him pitching fewer innings. And then he's got the Marlins backing him up. So I think the wins are going to be a struggle too. The cost is low enough that I don't really object to anybody taking him where he's going. It's just sort of like with Robbie Ray. There are other directions I'd rather go at that point in the draft.
Is there, Scott, how much would he have to drop for you to consider drafting him? Like, would it be after pick 200?
Let me see what other pitchers are going in that range. So that's where you get Nathan Eovaldi, Mackenzie Gore, who I like. I could have talked about Mackenzie Gore on this. Spencer Arrigetti's right there. Yeah, I think that's right around the range. I do think I have Arrigetti ranked ahead of Alcantara. I can't remember. It's pretty close. That's right about the point, I'd say 200, where I'd think about taking Alcantara.
Well, I guess, Scott, if Alcantara goes out there in spring training and looks really good, you'll be even further removed drafting him because I'm sure his ADP will go up at that point. So that'll be,
And that wouldn't change my biggest concern, which is just, is he going to give you enough volume for his strikeout shortcomings and win shortcomings to matter?
Yeah, that's fair. And I think you guys did an excellent job. You guys, we covered, I don't even know the amount of sleepers we covered, enough to fill every single bed of every single person watching right now. There was a lot of sleepers we covered tonight. Scott, Jake, you guys killed it. Thanks for helping me prep for my fantasy baseball draft because I feel like I got a whole list I can go through now.